Hello everyone, welcome back to the Hard Hat Talks podcast. My name's Kenneth Martin, your host. I'm joined today by Alan Wilson from Select. Hello Alan.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for welcoming me along, Kenneth. Appreciate it.
No problem at all, Alan, just for the viewers and the listeners, would you mind telling us a wee bit about yourself, please, and maybe how you got involved in the role at Select?
Sure. Kind of have to think back in dates. So I joined the construction sector way back in 1981. When I left college, I was recruited as a trainee buyer for a plumber's merchant.
Right.
So I became a trainee buyer, and then over a couple of years became a buyer. I then moved from there into a client body, Scottish Special Housing Association, if you can remember that organisation.
I'm afraid not, sorry, no.
Okay, you're too young. So SSHA were effectively a public sector funded body that built and rented out housing. You know, could really do one today, if I'm honest with you. You know, they built houses which were available for rent. So I worked in the administration department, and then I worked in the building division of SSHA for about 2 or 3 years. And then I moved from there to SNPF, which is the Plumbing Federation. I worked there for 27 years, various different roles, and then moved to Select 11 years ago, initially as head of membership communications, and became MD 6 years ago.
Ah, excellent. Okay, so for the viewers or the listener, most should probably know what Select is, but do you want to tell us a wee bit about what Select is and what it does?
Of course. So Select, its Sunday title is the Electrical Contractors Association of Scotland. This year is our 125th anniversary. We believe, and I've yet to hear anybody, and maybe one of your listeners or viewers might challenge this, we believe we're the oldest electrical trade association in the world. We're 1 year older than our friends south of the border. We hardly ever mention that, as you can imagine. But Select, as a trade association, principally is there to provide lots of services other trade bodies do. You know, provide information on employment affairs, education, training. But I think our USP, if a lot of people are interested in, you know, what is the unique part, because a lot of these things can be sourced elsewhere, is really our technical services. We have a very good technical team. We do technical assessments of all existing members on an ongoing basis and inspect all new members before they come to membership. And we do a lot of training. We train about 2,000, update skills training about 2,000 electricians each year on various courses that we run in the sector.
I think for us as architects then, that our paths would probably only cross really with Select when we get to the end of a project, particularly maybe a domestic project where we're looking for the electrician to give us the certification for the sign off for building control. What was interesting when our chat before we started recording was that actually Select is, as you've just said, a much broader organisation and does a lot more. Which is quite fascinating. I also didn't realise there was. I mean, you've mentioned that the organisation south of the border. Is there any other organisations up here in Scotland who do similar?
So I guess what you have is not trade bodies, but you have what you would call competent person scheme operators.
Right.
So that would be NIC, EIC, or and NAPIT. So NIC, it's quite a strange kind of story here. I can't remember exactly the timing of this, but the NIC was set up by the ECA and the EC of S as an independent inspection model for their members. And then over time it kind of metamorphosed into its own organisation, principally to look after schemes such as the Part P scheme down south. You mentioned the sign off for building standards, so they are a scheme provider, as we are, for the approved certificate of construction scheme. NAPIT also operate a competent person scheme. Those two organisations have also moved into other aspects of certification, including schemes connected to the microgeneration certification scheme, MCS, for solar, and are looking at other areas as well. So they are more, I would say, competent person scheme registrations. They don't offer support and information in terms of things like employment affairs and so on, or lobbying that we do a lot of as well.
Right. So kind of maybe a bit broader scope from
broader footprint, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot going on in the industry just now, the construction industry. No doubt. We invite guests along to try and find a wee bit more about what's going on in your own specific sectors. So Yeah, tell us a wee bit about what's going on just now and what Select's up to.
Okay, so I'll talk about Select, and if I may, I'll talk about the broader sector. Yeah, okay, cool. So from a Select perspective, mentioned before, 125 years old, when we began to look at our history, what we realised is in the very early stages, even back 100 plus years ago, the areas that were being discussed were people who weren't qualified doing electrical work, getting new and young people into the industry and getting paid, and you think 125 years later, what's actually moved on? Now, they wear different clothes and talk about different ways of doing things, but in principle, the reality is that those fundamental issues still remain with us currently. So if I pick out those kind of three key issues and maybe talk a little bit more about them at the moment. So if I talk about regulation of the industry and the profession, so the electrical industry is an unregulated profession, which means that you or I'm not an electrician, could tomorrow go out, set up a business, call ourselves Kenneth Martin Electrical, Alan Wilson Electrical, plumbing, decorating, and that's what you often see, is you see one van appearing with 5 different occupations and one person gets out. So that unregulated profession means that anyone can call himself an electrician, anyone can trade as an electrician. They would obviously, I would imagine, quickly fall foul of health and safety at work, the wiring regulations, if they do, which I suspect they would do, poor quality work. But nonetheless, they can call themselves an electrician.
See, I think that's quite interesting because, sorry for interrupting, because we've had Gordon on the show from FMB, and his big driver is to try and regulate or license the construction industry, particularly builders associated with domestic markets. Now, I didn't realise that the electrical market was regulated, so even someone in the industry as an architect with that experience, I would have suspected that anybody rolling up to my house, I get with builders that they're not regulated, but I would have expected anyone rolling up to my house to fix anything in the house, saying they're an electrician, would be a qualified electrician under regulation.
Listen, you're not alone. I mean, I think people have that, and in some ways that's good because people understand they should be regulated, should be proper qualifications. But the sad fact that there is nothing in actual place at the moment, it means that you have to be. There are something like 130 or so regulated professions, which means, the obvious ones like teacher, doctor, dentist, things that you would imagine would be. There are one or two odd ones, so for example, farrier. So if you want to shoe a horse, that's a protected title. So you couldn't go off and start a farrier's business because you'd be pulled up. Nightclub door person, or bouncer as I would have called them back in the day, that's a regulated profession. So there are, obvious ones you would put in this pile here and say, well, yeah, of course, you don't want to have anybody mucking about with your teeth with calling themselves a dentist or doctor, whatever, nurse. But at the same time, you can shoe a horse, but you have to be regulated, but you can do electrical work and nobody is kind of looking over your shoulder. And I think, if I talk back to kind of begin to stitch these things together, if you look at the young people, getting people into the sector, we don't, and I think most building sectors don't suffer from a lack of applicants. It's the businesses that actually recruit that's a challenge, and I'll mention that maybe later on. So, for example, this year, the training organisation which looks after the apprenticeship in the electrical sector, SECT, they do an aptitude test for young people, and it's now well recognised that to go to then an employer and say, I want to become an apprentice electrician, they would first thing probably ask you, have you got your SECT test result? Because they get a piece of paper that says, your SECT approved or passed the aptitude test. Now, between the 1st of January and I think the 31st of July, 19,000 people sat that test. 19,000. Now, the number recruited on average in a year of apprentice electricians is between 850 and 900.
Oh.
So it's not even scratching the surface really there. Now, first of all, you have to, I suppose, sort of start looking at a little bit more detail. So not all pass. Not all of them want to be an electrician, they just want to have that piece of paper in their pocket if something else doesn't work out for them. Some might want to do it now, but then come back to the actual apprenticeship in a year or so's time. But you've still got, I'd say, a fairly significant hardcore people who aspire to become an electrician. And I guess if I come back to the regulation perspective, you go through all of that training, all that apprenticeship, which you would have done as an architect, you know, university, then your apprenticeship and all the rest of it. And architect is a protected title. So you do all of that as an electrician, you go through all your apprenticeship, you sit your FICA, which is your final competence assessment, which is a 2-day thing, which gets you finally recognised as an electrician. You do all of that training, all of that time, and you go to the kids still go to pubs, you go to the local pub and you say, that's great, that's me, an electrician. And Jimmy or Jenny in the corner says, oh, I'm an electrician, never been anywhere near an apprenticeship. And that's really the thing, one of the main things that sticks in my throat potentially is that, you know, these people who claim to be electricians have been nowhere near any formal apprenticeship or training, and potentially carrying out dangerous, unsafe work, which could have potentially life-threatening issues, you know, if
absolutely.
forward.
I think it's when you think of the ramification of it all, it's actually quite mind-boggling just how disastrous it could be for someone in a house or a building who's so there's two things there in terms of stats. I want to see if you can pick your brain if you know the answers.
Sure.
One is about well, there's a theme for all of the guests who come on, and that theme is recruitment in the industry. You know, so you're talking about 19,000 sitting the kind of the aptitude test, and then about 800-900 actually qualifying. How has that statistic changed over the last, say, 3, 4, 5 years? Is there a gradual increase or decrease, or is it stabilised at that kind of numbers in terms of?
Okay. Well, I'll be honest with you, that 19,000 figure is the first time, and I'm a SEC trustee, and have been for 5 years now. I've never heard that even mentioned previously by the previous administration. So I suspect it was still high thousands, but I think there is obviously, an interest now, particularly in the electrical sector, because people see it now. As I said, you know, we're now talking about the electrification of society. You know, we're now talking about everything working on electricity. You know, my watch needs charge up. Our laptops, our iPhones, or whatever it might be, our cars, electric cars sitting in the car park here. So everything is moving in that generation. And I think younger people now are switched on. You've also got the green element connected to that, you know, around solar and so on. So there is an appetite for young people to consider that, and let's be honest, it's a generally well-paid job. You know, you go through that 4-year apprenticeship, a couple of years experience, you know, you could be easily earning 30, 35, 40 plus, you know, and if you're able to, you know, so there are great opportunities. And if you look at, you know, kids who just go through university route, come out, you know, many of them sadly don't get jobs in the area that they went into, end up in maybe minimum paid jobs. You know, it's fine at the beginning, but when they see their peers coming through, overtaking them and then salary increases going forward. So the numbers are there. I think across the board, construction-wise, obviously other people will have data there. My overall feeling is that there are lots of young and older people who want to maybe retrain and go back into a sector, but it's the number of employers willing to do that. And again, you talked about the kind of hopper situation, you know, having these big numbers and then at the end you've got a small number. It's the same with employers. Because principally what you're talking about in Scotland in construction is a mirror of Scotland's economy. You're talking about thousands of small businesses, architectural practices, engineering businesses, plumbers, heaters, electricians. You know, they're all micro businesses. And these guys, you know, if they're not being given support, either through direct financial support from government, or they've been hammered by increases in national insurance or whatever it might be, then they just stop because they don't have that kind of line of sight of 2 years' time. They're living kind of month to month or 3 month to 3 month. So their decision to recruit an apprentice is often based on, I need somebody to give me a hand with this, so I'll take on an apprentice, and then they kind of muddle through. I saw a stat recently from a training organisation I'm part of, and listen, I don't think anybody recruits on return on investment an apprentice. I think they do it for all sorts of reasons. You know, they do it because they were an apprentice and they want to give somebody a chance. They do it because they want to grow their business, and homegrown is probably perceived as good. I can't think of many businesses I've ever spoken to have said, oh, I've taken on an apprentice because I'll no make money from them. So the stat that came out recently is in a small domestic electrician across the UK, the return on investment was less, after 4 years, was less than £100. So all that investment the employer puts in terms of their training, their time away at college, where they're paying wages, holidays, all these kind of things, you merge that all together. Now, as I say, it's slightly irrelevant, and I don't want it to skew the conversation about, I think, becoming an apprenticeship in any area is a great thing to do. But if you were to sit down there as a cold-hearted business person and say, look, if I take this person on, they're going to give me X back at that level.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we've heard that from various different sectors, you know, and even as an architect, I think, well, we've taken on, if you like, junior architects in training, and the reality is by the time you do train them and get them to, I say, a fairly competent level, which can take up a lot of the time of the senior architects, the architects who've got the experience, you know, the correcting the drawings, change that, check the drawings again, check whatever they're checking, you know, check plan application forms are filled in right. The reality is you can really burn through a lot of money very, very quickly. But there is that thing of, it's our duty, it's our responsibility to bring these apprentices, whether they're young or more mature, coming back in, to bring them through and train them through it and protect the future of the industry, you know. So I do get that. I do get that.
I mean, I think I know the electrical industry is the largest single employer of apprentices in Scotland. So I think Scotland, construction is the biggest single modern apprenticeship scheme, and within that sits electrical, I think, is number one, then you've got other sub-trades that come out of that. So in training at the moment, there's something like 2,800 apprentices and adult trainees. The other question we're often asked is, well, how many do you need? You know, and that's quite difficult because it used to be reasonably straightforward back in the day when everybody retired at 65, because you could take a snapshot and say date of birth, well, it's going to be X retiring this year. Now that doesn't happen. You know, people work longer, etc. I think not just my gut feeling, but the industry gut feeling is that that's not enough. You know, the 900, the 1,000 is not enough. We need to increase that, but how do you do that? You know, how do you, and that's a lot of areas that we're looking at the moment. As I say, we don't have the problem with the applicants. The issue is connected to the employers and the support that they need these small businesses. And continually you hear from government and others saying, you know, we need more people in the sector because we're going to ratchet up all this work and all these kind of projects are going to come on board. We do a bit of work with a guy called Professor Sean Smith from Edinburgh Uni, a really interesting guy.
Okay. Sean Smith.
So Professor Sean Smith is head of the building school at Edinburgh Uni, and he's very much involved in these city deals kind of thing, you know, and he's spoken at a number of events over the past couple of years. And Sean makes the point really that there's going to be a massive amount of building to be done right across Europe. You know, and infrastructure and housing and all the rest of it, you know, more than was actually necessary after the end of the Second World War. There's going to have to be millions of houses built, millions of things done, for all sorts of socioeconomic reasons, including, you know, more people living on their own, you know, marriages breaking up and people perhaps not getting back together, so live, you know, two houses instead of one and all these kind of things, you know, so a massive amount, and then infrastructure itself. So the demand is there and is going to be there. The problem, as we all know, is unless we find this mythical magic money tree that everybody always refers to politicians, how do you properly support the sector? Because if I come back to that analogy earlier about the hopper and the very large amount of small businesses who are really the fundamentals of recruitment, it's not the big businesses, the tier ones, etc. on site. They don't really particularly recruit many apprentices. It's the small businesses that work in my town. I come from a pretty small town and bigger. We've got 5 electricians. I think 3 of them have got apprentices. So these are the bread and butter guys that, kind of, as you were saying earlier, you do it for those right reasons, kind of thing. And I really, you know, applaud these businesses who do that, because it's a big choice to do that, and it's a big commitment, you know. And again, I don't know many employers that do it on the basis of, well, we'll do it and then we'll see how it goes, kind of thing, and then we might have to get rid of this person. They want to keep them and see them to the end of their time, which can sometimes be quite difficult financially for them. So I think apprenticeships are so important and so vital, but I think, you know, gosh, I could go on for hours about, you know, the government's focus on education and university kind of thing. to what effect? You know, I mean, that was a sadly misplaced, in my opinion, policy. I think you need to have a kind of proper balance of people coming into work with hand skills and things that we all need, as well as the proper university training.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, because I think I was actually listening to a YouTube video this morning, or part of a YouTube video, I never finished it, and it was people's perception on AI and how that's going to affect jobs. And we've chatted about AI within some of the podcasts, but the reality is most people think that they're fairly safe, that AI is not going to affect their job. And the reality is most of us will be affected by AI, to the extent that the university jobs, you know, doctors, we're seeing accountants just now, that paralegals are being replaced, etc. Data entry has been done by AI.
Yeah.
So the reality is that these jobs that involve hand skills, working in sites, you know, I'm going to say maybe out cutting the grass, but actually I seen a guy cutting the grass today, standing in one of these robots. That it's not a robot, but standing on one of these things cutting the grass. I thought that could be a robot in 2 or 3 years' time, you know. So it does start to make you think about a better balance between the support that we've got for university attendees versus apprenticeships as well.
Yeah.
And I say that because we've got 2 daughters who are, one's just started university, the other's looking to go to university. And I remember saying to them, look, getting into university is great, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but if for something happens that you don't get in, it's not all that it used to be. It's not the end of the world, you know. Something I wanted to pick on a wee bit more with you then was, we've mentioned about it being an unregulated industry, and we've mentioned about the man in the pub saying, well, I'm an electrician as well. Yeah. Is there any stats on what that kind of, you know?
Okay, so when we sort of started this most recent campaign, we got quite a lot of analysis done about, you know, the number of potential people who are claiming to be electrician. We reckon it could be, you know, about 20% of the, inverted commas, workforce who claim to be an electrician are unqualified.
Right.
You know, they tend to be, not always, but they do tend to be that, what I described earlier, as the person who will turn up at your house in a van that says plumber, electrician, decorator, roofer, you know, and then one person gets out. That's who they tend to be. And what they tend to do is kind of small scale electrical work, you know, where they'll maybe connect bits of, if they're doing kitchen work, they'll maybe connect lights up or cookers and stuff like that. And they might have done this for years and been fine, but as we all know, things move on. You know, the wiring regulations, which is really the kind of Bible for installation, it's now moving into Amendment 4 of the latest version next year. Now, that will change some of the requirements around that. So every year that goes by, there's an amendment made. Therefore, if the person maybe did have some kind of knowledge back in, say, 2020 or 2000, 25 years later, things are completely different, you know.
Yeah.
So it's that putting themselves and the customer at risk, and the potential of that. So, yeah, to answer your question, about 20% probably of that. And I think the other thing, which, you know, we made in the case to government at that time, was the economic impact, you know, the costs of fires. You know, I think it was something like 13% of house fires were traced back to poor electrical work kind of thing. That's a difficult stat to get, because often well, in those days anyway, fire brigade service used to put everything as electrical as an electrical fault, and it could be a product fault rather than the actual installation. So there are issues connected to getting proper stats, but I think overriding, you know, is this fact that it just can't be right that someone can call themselves an electrician without having any qualifications, any experience, and they come into your house, and as you said earlier, you know, you trust these people. If they say an electrician, you're not going to say, no, you're not. Now, there is an identification. You know, we through the Scottish Joint Industry Board, we run a registration scheme for individual electricians, and they get a card with their photograph on it. So you could legitimately ask to see their card, and most will carry that. But who's going to do that? You know, Mrs. Smith or Mrs. McGlumphy or Mr. Jones, you know, or whoever, isn't going to suddenly say, "Oh, let me see your card, son," before I get you over the door.
But I remember a few years back, we did a house up in Fife. And about 2 or so years after it was done and dusted, you know, the client was doing alterations, and it involved work to the electrics, and we got a phone call to say that the initial install in the house, which was only 2-year-old at that point, was dreadful. And that's a bit
Couldn't have been a select member.
crazy. Well, we actually had all the we had all the paperwork.
Did you?
I don't know if it's select or
Right,
but
okay.
we had all the paperwork. We had the guy's card, all that kind of stuff, as provided by the contractor to building control, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But it turns out that he was using the forms. That
Oh, really?
From I mean, he wasn't what he said he was. So it was a bit. You think, well, okay, so there's a bit of who's responsible for checking, for double checking,
Yeah.
But that was an interesting one. So, in terms of select, then there's obviously the one of the challenges, as you mentioned, is I assume the big challenge for you is how do we get electricians regulated? And I think probably as we look at becoming a more electrified society, we'll look at some of the, for example, car chargers. If I was putting now that you've got me thinking about it, if I was putting a car charger in my home, which I might be doing over the next 6 months or so when I change my car, I'm probably going to go hybrid. I'm not sure if I'm full electric.
Got
yet,
the range anxiety,
I might go hybrid, but I would now be thinking I want to make sure that that's fitted by a competent, registered, qualified architect, electrician. So, with that in mind, what does the next 12 months maybe look like for Select and trying to push that through the political scene?
Yeah. Okay. So, what we've been trying to achieve over the past few years is that lobbying of government, particularly to get regulation through. We were successful in some cases of getting kind of cross-party support. We have what's called a wall of support. So if any of your listener or viewers want to sign up to that, contact us at Select. So that's a wall of support saying we support the regulation of electricians as a profession, kind of thing. We've got lots of politicians on that. I think some like 30 or so, 40 or so MSPs and MPs have signed up to that. Right. We've got a cross-party group which we meet with to push that through. What we're aiming to do in the next 12 months, because as you rightly say is leading into an election next May, is to embed where we can the promise for regulation into party manifestos. We had that success with that at the last election. The Labour Party put into theirs. We've got the Greens who said they've committed to do it and will do it, and we've got other parties we're meeting with. Because if we can get into the manifestos, I don't want to be sceptical here about politicians, but if you get into the manifestos, at least you can sort of point at that thing and say, well, look, under clause 43, you said you would do this kind of thing. So that's what we're aiming to do at the moment. We've got a number of meetings lined up with politicians to do that. As a kind of side issue for that, we have a oven-ready member bill, private member bill that would be called down south in Parliament in Westminster, which has been written for us by a barrister, and it lays out how a regulation scheme could operate. And we've got a few people who are interested in sponsoring that members bill in the next parliamentary session. Right. But as I said earlier, whenever we speak to politicians especially, and anybody generally, and explain to them that it's an unregulated profession, throw up their hands in horror and say, oh, I can't believe that, how has that not happened? And we say the same. We throw our hands up and say, well, make it happen. You have the power to make it happen. So the opportunity is there. We've tried it twice before, 1917 and 1939. I guess some of your viewers might join the dots with what was happening in the world around those days. But we've come back to it again, and I think, as I say, because of the fact we're now looking at this Electrification of Society, I think it's so important that the products that are put into our homes, the products that we use on a day-to-day basis, are done and installed safely by people who know what they're doing. Because we're seeing it already now. We're seeing kickbacks already from solar panel installations, which haven't been installed properly, haven't been connected properly. All of these things are beginning to bubble to the surface because there's more of them being installed, kind of thing. And the last thing I want is a situation where the sector is actually undervalued because people think, well, everything's okay. It's not. There are lots of things out there which just need one or two things to happen in parallel to each other. I mean, as an architect, all the planning you do in that and thinking, unintended consequence. If I do this, what will happen over here, kind of thing. That's what careful planning's about.
Yeah, I think the unintended consequences in our industry just now are quite far-reaching, and
Yeah.
I mean, because I think it's probably the public's perception of us as architects, as designers, is that we know everything about everything to do with putting a building together, but the reality is it's just so complicated and complex now. I'm going to use both of those words, but it's impossible to do.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about a typical job, for example, if you're doing a new build house and we need to put in PV panels on the roof, the process of, deciding which roof they're going to go on, do they fit, what's the orientation, putting that through the SAP process, getting that through planning and building control to then get it on site is complex and overbearing enough without us having any skill set to go on the roof and say, yeah, that's installed properly, because we just don't know, and we're not trained. And then when you multiply that over all the different disciplines that's involved in the industry, even just putting a simple house together, we just can't know everything about everything, you know. And what we do know is probably only because we've picked up on site, probably because of mistakes that's happened in the past, as opposed to us deliberately going out our way to read a book or be informed about something. Because the regulations are just so far wide-reaching now, and changing all the time.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, and you were saying about what's in Select next 12 months, what's in the industry more broadly in the next sort of few years. We're now looking in the electrical sector as effectively new build houses in the future becoming mini power stations. Where in reality, you will bring your electric car home, you will plug it in, and the electricity will go the other way. And you'll actually be providing electricity from outside back into your house. That's the direction travel they're now talking about. More broadly. So I think it's really important. Again, I can't stress this enough, that people, first of all, if you're using an electrician just now, please check websites of the bodies we've kind of mentioned. Select obviously, and the NIC as well. But ask the question, are you qualified? Because taking on trust of someone, and you've had an experience yourself in your business organisation, that. And there are lots of people out there. You can pick up the phone and check these things. But it really is so important and so vital for Scotland's economy going forward that we put that proper investment into the construction sector, which is an enabling sector. I was at a meeting with government the other day, making the point that other than house builders who build on spec, but they're building because they know people want to buy houses. We are an enabling sector. Architects are an enabling sector. A client will come and say, I want to build this, can you draw it for me? And then they'll come to an electrician, a plumber, a builder, can you build it for me, kind of thing. So we are doing their bidding, and we want to make sure that when we do that they give us plenty of notification in advance of what they want, and that's the conversation with government was about, how the skill landscape might look in a few years' time. And the point I was making is, I'll try not to get too political here. The point I was making is it's really important for you, government, to make sure that when you announce plans or processes or, a direction, say renewable technology, a good example, that you stick to that. Because what happens is we use that as a stick, the barometer, then say, right, as we did in Select, when there was this issue connected to more and more renewable technology, right, we'll set up our own training course, we'll get our members trained up, and then funding's withdrawn, changes in legislation, and there's a party who may make some inroads into government next year or so who have a completely different view on renewable technology. So it's difficult for us as trade bodies who often lead that training for those micro businesses especially, to say to members, right, you've got to invest in that, which is not only the cost of the course itself, but the couple of days off. In fact, the solar and battery storage one we run is 5 days.
Right.
So you've got the cost of the course, you've got 5 days of no earnings as well, and then you come out of that and we are saying to businesses, invest in this because this is what's going to happen. And then you get your legs cut off because they say, well, there's a change of policy here. So we have to be in this together, we have to work closely together, and I think, the collective that we've actually established, I don't know if other guests have mentioned this. So at the time of COVID, again, because I'd been around the trade body forum for a long time, went to government and said, look, we need to have a collective voice for the construction sector. So we set up at that time, which was called the CICV organisation. So I've been the chair of that now probably for too long, 5 years. But CICV brought together 30 plus trade and professional bodies, including RIS,
All right, okay, yeah.
RICS, Scottish Building, FMB, plumbing, all, BMF. So every aspect of the industry is involved in CICV. In fact, after today, I'll be going back to chair a meeting of that. And it still meets, and it's now seen by government as the industry leadership group.
Right.
So it's the de facto voice of construction in Scotland. So we have a voice. But what we need to do is bring those kind of bodies together and say, well, look, what are the requirements of architects? What do you need to know? What do we need to help you with, in education and so forth? You were mentioning earlier about university, when before I came in here, I was listening to the radio about the funding crisis. It's there now.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere, exactly. And but that has implications as well for you and for select members and other body members, because universities were investing in new buildings and new places and halls of residence, all of that. So if these things go, it's not just the frontline lecturers and universities that suffer, it's the kind of consequences behind that. The architects who can't design any because they're not being asked to design more housing, accommodation, the builders aren't building these,
That's right. It just keeps going and going and going.
Yeah.
I think that one of the biggest challenges that we face as architects, I suppose, is trying to negotiate the planning system, which we've spoken a lot about. And that becomes the developers' bugbear, because it's taken far too long to get sometimes what we would argue is simple projects through the process. The housing emergency, I mean, we hear all these things about, green shoots in terms of policies for getting houses through. And we're now starting to see things, memos coming out, stuff from central government. You're thinking, right, okay, but the reality is that's not going to happen fast. I mean, we're talking about stuff. I think they're now talking about stuff in terms of what can we do, but it's not happening fast enough.
No.
And I've got a lot of friends who run architecture practices. We're a small practice compared to some of my friends who are directors in some very big practices. And we're all saying the same thing, is that the policies aren't going to change quickly.
No.
But we know they're looking at them. But what would really help is if planners and building control officers would actually just pick up the phone and respond to us. You're putting emails in or asking for clarifications, and there's just no dialogue. It's just a wall, and that's certainly something that if we could eliminate that culture. I don't know why it's here though. Partly because of COVID, but there's something else going on. I think as to why that came in. But that's the drum that I beat,
No, listen, I think, through CICV, that, Kenneth, is a message I hear from your body, RIS, and others as well, from builders as well. It's not necessarily around the plumbing, heating, mechanical sector, but we hear it from others, and I relay that information, as I say, because of the role through the industry leadership group I'm involved in. I can speak to, and did speak to the Deputy First Minister a few weeks ago about that, and said, look, if you're going to do one thing to help the industry, it would be to sort out planning. Because, although it would probably directly impact on you more than anybody, it does then, it's a pebble in the pond, isn't it? Everything goes back.
The whole chain.
And that's the point I made to her. I said that needs to be done quickly, and there was lots of people nodding around the table at that, no, there was a new point. There wasn't sort of plucked at. That's things I've heard consistently from people. Yeah.
Well, that in mind then, I'm probably coming towards the question which was left by your last guest for you.
Okay.
So, and maybe not related to Select, but if you had a magic wand, I'm sure you've thought about this actually, if you had a magic wand and there was one thing you could change about the construction sector, what might that be?
Okay, well, I suppose I kind of have given that thought, and having been around for quite a number of years, 40 years plus in the construction sector, but, nearly 40 in trade associations, I think a lot of it boils down to money.
Right.
Cash flow, let's make the money circulate. I talked earlier about these small businesses that in all sectors that do the work yourselves as architects, electricians, plumbers, so forth. You need the money to invest, to pay your staff, for them to spend their money locally in shops and so forth, kind of thing. If I go back to my example in my hometown in Biggar, we've got a building business, we've got a designer, we've got a couple of architects who work from home, we've got plumbers, electricians. They all employ people locally, so that money that they pay their staff is spent in local shops, spent in local economy, is donated to good causes around that community kind of thing. So making the money flow and not somebody sitting on it. And I mean, not just big clients, I mean even domestic customers who are difficult sometimes getting money out of.
Yeah.
You know, pay the money. I mean, we, I suppose, lucky enough to be able to pay our bills. In fact, we have a competition with our local plumber where I know for a fact now, he now issues his invoices on a Sunday night after 8 o'clock. So if we've had any work done, I'm on my laptop waiting at 8:01
Yeah.
for his email to arrive and I pay him.
Right. Yeah.
And I had an old school plumber who did work in our old house before that, and he, you know, despite the fact he only lived about half a mile away, got sent his bill by post a month after he'd done it, and I kept asking him, "Where's your bill? Where's your bill?" And I got the bill in, and I paid it that minute almost. And I texted him and said, "That's your bill paid." And he said, "Oh, that's great. I've never really had anybody." And that's what we need. I think there's a culture has developed amongst everyone now that they don't want to pay for some reason, or lots of people don't want to dairy and whatever. And if I come back to that, if I come back to building, industry, construction sector, part of that problem, I think, is because you've got unregulated people. You know, I think people, particularly domestic people, aren't used to dealing with trades people often.
Yep.
I mean, how many times have you used an electrician in your life?
Oh gosh.
In your house?
A qualified one's maybe the bit. I don't know. Not often.
But not that often. You know, we're all the same. We
Yeah.
use them when we normally have an
Yeah.
emergency. You don't suddenly call somebody out and say, "Oh, like we've got the EICR, which is like an MOT or electrical system." So we don't really, we call them out when it's an emergency. So you don't see them that often, kind of thing. And I think there's this perception being built up, this myth that, you know, the cowboy builder myth, and that's kind of percolated in other sectors as well. And the industry doesn't, let's be honest, doesn't do sometimes a job to kind of help themselves. So regulation would mean that you couldn't be an electrician, and they're accountable then in that. So the magic wand for me would be to have a mechanism which would follow somewhat like the Amazon position, you know, that you get your bill when the guy leaves, or the girl leaves your property after doing the work, and you click a button that says paid.
I would agree with that. I think there's two sides to that. There's a domestic market, and I think any work that we've had done in the house or what have you, you know, we don't instruct it unless we know the money's there to pay for it.
Yes,
you know, and when, as soon as the bill comes in, it's paid.
Yeah.
And if I know my wife, she's probably left. I mean, we had guys in laying the floor the other day there. And of course, she will pay the bill to the company. But the two guys that came in left with a tenner each, they won't get themselves a coffee.
Yeah,
you know, one of those
That's
ones.
good. Yeah.
But when it comes to the world of business,
Yeah.
We're seeing it. There's an incredible, I don't know. It's just like a delay
Yeah.
in getting money from clients.
Yeah.
Not all of them, of course,
No.
but some of them, you know, and you know they've got. Well, you think you know they've got money that, you know, they're bona fide, good, strong businesses. But all that does is, if they don't pay you, you know, then you're looking at, right, well, you know, what am I paying this month?
Exactly,
You know,
yeah.
and it's always the same when you get to the end of the month. You're thinking, right, you know, I can pay that, and pay that, and pay that. You know, I know that they'll be happy.
Yeah.
And then you're on the phone, can I pay you next week when I get this?
Yeah.
You know, and it's not a nice position to be in, and it's not a nice position to be put in. You know, considering that some of the businesses I'm talking about, I know that they are paid, you know, right away.
Yeah.
As soon as something happens in their business, they're paid because they face the public. You know, it's like you know, coffee shops, restaurants. You know, you can't leave without paying the money. You know, yet they've got credit with us. You know, so that kind of stuff, you know, is probably not quite right. But I appreciate that they've got other bills and other overheads and all that stuff that they've got.
I think just keeping the money flowing. I mean, there's a consultation being launched by the UK government, which I do, you know, if the magic wand is maybe going to happen, it could happen around that. It's a prompt payment consultation. It talks about ways in which commercial payments could be done and could be improved, and it also talks about, you know, this kind of elephant in the room about retention, which has been a huge issue for the whole sector over the years, kind of thing. And the proposals they're putting forward in there is prohibition or trust. So putting the money in a trust. Now, prohibition for me would mean that they would just call it something else. You know, I mean, if you think, well, not if you think back, but if you've got this perception in your head of what prohibition looked like in America in the 20s with no drink, they all found ways around it, didn't they? They had stills in all sorts of places, and drink still went on. So even if they said, we'll prohibit retention, it will still go on under another name. The trust is for me is a more applicable and appropriate way of doing it. You know, the money then, which is really, be honest, is the subcontractors or the contractors' money. It's in a trust, so it can't be taken away by upstream insolvency and so forth. So the money is there. I do understand, back to the unintended consequences, that clients will say, well, you know, rightly or wrongly, we use retention to fund another project because we then, you know, it's like you were saying earlier, you know, the money's then used to pay something else kind of thing. But at the end of the day, these are the small businesses who are providing the support and services. They're recruiting young people, trainees, apprentices. They're using local suppliers. They're circulating the money locally kind of thing. Let's support them.
Yeah, I would agree with that, 100%. So before we wrap up then, have you got a question for our next guest?
Well, I guess it's kind of similar, although maybe slightly different. If you were to write your eulogy and you could do it, what would your first 2 sentences say?
Gosh, I might need to send that one to the guests before they come. They need to put some thinking into that one. Fantastic. Okay, we've had a good time, I think, Alan.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. It's been good.
It's been good. It's been interesting to open up what I think is maybe a bit of a sleeping giant.
Yeah.
Because it's certainly something that I never knew. So hopefully any architects that are listening, if you did know that, well done. If you didn't, then there you go.
Yeah.
It's not something that's not regulated. Look forward to seeing what happens over the next 12 months or so. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks very much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to the Hard Hat Talks. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. That way, you'll be sure to never miss an episode. If you've got any feedback or a topic you want us to tackle, please drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Till next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and keep your hard hat on.